From somewhere near the Atlantic Ocean, it's the Nolan Carr Night Show with Nolan Carr and his guest this week, the incredible and acclaimed host of Discograffiti, Dave Gebroe. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, here he is. Here's Nolan. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another exciting edition here on the Nolan Carr Night Show on YouTube and all the audio platforms. As always, do us a favor by subscribing, commenting, sharing, liking, all that fun jazz. They'll continue to grow the show. So one day you're going to say, holy crap, that was a great episode with my guest this week. Nevertheless, on to the fun festivities. David Gebroe is our guest this week, host of the podcast Discograffiti, where his frenetic yearning for the true story and nothing but the truth through his many album reviews, band dissections, and interviews comfortably have him justifiably placed amongst the gold standard of podcasts with or without the placement of music as the theme. Whether it be inviting you to a honeymoon with zombies, showing you who the homeboy is, or anything else in between, my guest has done it all without the predisposition of coming off as a braggadocious know-it-all. It's my pleasure to have Mr. Gebroe as our guest this week. Dave, it's a pleasure to finally meet face to face.
It is definitely a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you for doing some deep dive, deep sea bombing, some of my CV credits there in the intro. I appreciate that.
Well, even though I most likely butchered it with getting caught up on my words, I try my best to do some sort of replication of looking like I know what I'm saying. What I want to first ask you is, knowing the schedule and the output you have with your product, I'm sure for you there's a lot of decompression from not doing it and saying, okay, I'm pausing that, I'm doing other stuff. What's that like for you in terms of decompressing and turning off from all the music and reviewing stuff when you're not doing it?
I don't turn off, and I don't not do it. I'm doing it all the time, and I wanted to find something in my life where it didn't feel like work, but that I wanted to be doing at all times, constantly. So I really don't stop. I mean, I have a family, so I love spending time with my 6-year-old son and my wife, but they know it's kind of like it's not a job, it's like my mistress. So,
Sure.
but it's like if my mistress was invited to live in our house and to sleep in our bed.
Mentioning a shared interest in ourselves, being fans of music, I would like to think you're a bigger music fan than myself, whether it be the Beach Boys or not. For you, growing up, although you also loved going to the movies, what was it about music that you connected to at a younger age, never mind the Beach Boys music in particular?
It was the transportative properties of both music and film. To me, there's no separation between the two. In my head, it's always been my brain stammering at all times, music and movies, music and movies, music and movies. That's my brain. My brain is saying that on a loop for 24 hours a day ever since I was born. And somewhere in there falls reading and, and running or walking. But, mainly it's just music and film. And, to me, to be able to disappear into the fabric of an aesthetic universe that has its own rules. So, in other words, to, not just a band's career, but every album or every movie has its own aesthetic rules and its own if it really is being maximized as far as or optimized as far as what the art form offers. Every album is potentially a sound world unto itself with its own aesthetic rules and principles, its own beginning, middle, and end. And if it's really done correctly, and if it really is, if that if that sound world has been well decorated, then it's almost literally, it feels to me like an inhabitable universe that one can actually be inside. For example, Sergeant Pepper, or certainly rock operas in the late '60s, like Tommy. It feels like this is a place that I can be, and no more so to me than the Beach Boys' Smile. To me, is a geographic place that I can be. I can be in Smile World. I used to, in the early '90s, when I really was discovering it for the first time, it was almost like I could visualize being inside that place, and I could see it almost as if I was in the sky looking down on, like, over there is Wonderful and over here is Cabin Essence, and I could see, the workers on the railroad, looking up at the sky and wiping their sweat with the back of their arm, and the man and the woman from Wonderful and Child is Father of the Man, now living in a cabin and looking out on the railroad. And then over here is, is, let's say, I love to say Dada, and there's tributaries which flood into Surf's Up. And so if it's done well, I can picture it. And I don't think of myself as somebody with synesthesia. But there is, in the best possible music, there is a visual component to music that if you're a fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it sweeps you along and scoops you up inside of its world.
Beyond, and I'm not going to count a lullaby or nursery rhyme, things of that nature, but do you remember that first album then as a kid that really made you said, "Oh, what's this thing I'm gravitating towards called music and that artist?" Do you remember that album or song in particular?
It was Sergeant Pepper. It was I have everything was black, and then it was like a TV switched on, and I was looking at the back and the front of the Beatles Sergeant Pepper album cover and wondering who these people were. And at the time, although I didn't know what the word myth meant, it seemed like these were mythological figures that were bigger than life. And I still feel that way when they're more human to me now,
Sure.
but that feeling still accompanies it when I look at that particular album cover. Um, and Yeah, so that was the first one that I may have had less cool records before it, but I really remember Sergeant Pepper being my first record.
My perspective on people in general is that if you really are into something or you really gravitate towards something, you're told, oh, you should, go to school for this or find some sort of professional output with that degree, which obviously you're doing now with your podcast. But when you, as a kid, are getting really into music and movies, how soon after that are you planning out a avenue or interest in potentially chasing that love as a full-time career? Was that before you went to college or was that afterwards?
Single digit age. I've always
Okay,
known that I mean, what I wanted to do and what I did wind up doing, although it's amongst other things as well, is to be a filmmaker. And there's not much difference between making films and making these shows, except it's just an auditory component. I'm using I'm using visual component as well with the promotional, with the promo stuff that I create, but really one of the least appealing aspects of making a film is dealt a hand by what I do now, which is the length of time it takes to actually create from soup to nuts, to create a film and to sell it and have it be seen by an audience. It took a long time. And that's if you're not held up by any parts of the process, which you typically are. If you're an independent filmmaker, at many points along the way, you are stopped by forces outside your control. And with these shows, I put out four a week because for me, I'm just used to, these odds that are just stacked impossibly against you. With creating a podcast, there's no odds at all. You
sure.
can decide to do it, you can do it. It's just like drawing. I mean, what's going to come between me and my decision to draw something? There's going to be nothing. So to celebrate that freedom, the impossibility of that freedom, having film as my my preferred artistic direction for such a long period of time, to celebrate that, I just keep making them as often as I can because I can.
What does then, compared to music, what does film and filmmaking provide you that music can't?
Well, filmmaking kind of gobbles up like a giant Pac-Man all the different strains of artistic pursuit. So there's the visual, the auditory, it has music, it has painting, visual design, working with people. You need your left brain and your right brain. You need to exist as a businessman in order to be an artist. It really kind of devours it all. So, toward that end, you can't possibly do more as an artist than to be a filmmaker.
Although the filmography that you have may not be super extensive compared to maybe other directors out there, the ones that you have made and have come out have had lots of success and duly noted for those projects. That being the case for your experience, what does that mean to you that even if you haven't been doing it for a super long time, the projects that you have all done extremely well and have all
I would
achieved great success?
I wouldn't say extremely well or achieved great success. I mean, I've had two completed feature films, incomplete, um, which I attempted to make right out of college, and then two that I tried and succeeded in making. Both of them were very successful in that I completed them and they were picked up for distribution, which maybe 0.1% of all films that are made are actually completed and sold. That is rare in itself. But to be fair, the first film, Zombie Honeymoon, was not amazingly successful. It was picked up and I was paid money for that deal, but it wasn't seen, on a wide scale. That one's the Homeboy. I would say, I give things star ratings
Mhm.
for a living. So just to be fair, I'll say that that one I would give 3 out of 4 stars. I usually do a 4-star scale for movies. I do 5 stars for music for some reason. And then Zombie Honeymoon is a different beast because that actually did do very well. It was picked up by Showtime, and there was a pretty nice advance that I was given at that time. To be fair, if the film was made at this time, if I came out with it now, I would not be getting, I would not have gotten the kind of deal that I got back then. It
Mm.
was a particular time in history when that was possible, which is, mid to late 2000s. So, but it played a lot of festivals. I flew around the world to all different festivals around the world, following it around, and or I should say, I was flown out to all festivals, which was much different than the Homeboy, where I flew myself. And um, and in addition, it's been or it exists in over at last count over 45 countries. So and it's on cable all the time. There was a theatrical release. It was well reviewed. The Homeboy didn't get all that. So I would say one achieved maybe not the entirety of what I wanted to achieve, but it came pretty close. And the Homeboy not quite as much. But the path to being a filmmaker is a very difficult one because I was trying to set up my third film when I actually got into making the podcast, and for years I was looking for money, and I even had John Landis on board as an executive producer and Elijah Wood on board as the actual producer. So I really thought I had it made. I have this team that can't be beat, and it's true. They couldn't be beat, except for the fact that they couldn't get the money. So, if they can't get the money, I
Yeah.
mean, I had always been able to get the money for my own films. And then the minute I left it up to someone else, they were not able to do it. So it was the part of the process that I just could not deal with it anymore. It was complete insanity to deal with that end of it.
When I started my podcast, this one that we're on right now, I like to think, oh, I saw enough and I wanted to do something similar, but I never really watched them unless I was having a guest on that has public interviews of themselves and researching and taking notes so I can be prepared of touching topics that haven't been discussed. But I never watched really podcasts in general because I couldn't take anything away from it that I couldn't find on Wikipedia or that was already public. I wanted to, as a fan, we all have specific questions for a Beach Boys or a group we love that isn't being asked beyond the greatest hits type of things. And so I set out to that way, not as maniacal as you with your approach, but to that extent of doing it because there's some groups I like to think out there that have the financial means of having all these great guests on. There's some people who have the social status type of way of being friends with them or being able to be well known enough to have these guests on. For you, in a world filled with books and movies and TV shows and coloring books and other YouTube channels and stuff centered around music, but also the Beach Boys, why was it important for you to join an arena where there's already a lot of residents within that same motif?
Are you talking about the Beach Boys specifically?
Well, music, but also Beach Boys in particular as well.
Well, first of all, there's no show like Discograffiti, so I didn't have any trepidation about diving into it because there's no show where you go through an artist's entire discography and rate everything from 0 to 5. And with historical, items, you're getting a full sense of, the real innards of a band. And then, after my creative partner split to focus on his own career of making music, it started, the vibe of the show changed a little bit because it was less dependent on my interplay between Joe Kennedy and myself and more dependent on who the guest was because it turned into often, it wasn't always, but often it became, a sort of like, like going back and looking over a group's entire career. That was really the exception, not the rule at first. It was mainly a musician, a singer, whatever, a songwriter, looking over somebody else's work and just being a geeky fan along with me. But then it mainly became an artist looking over his own or her own discography, which is different because if I don't like what you've done, I can't lie about it. I'm not good at that.
Sure,
So there have been situations where I'm honest with somebody. If I don't like anything they've done, I won't use that format.
sure.
I'm not interested in just slamming somebody. But there have been bands where, there's been, a bunch of like what I think is mediocre stuff. And then there's a bunch of great records.
Sure.
That I'll do, but I'll tell them beforehand that there's, a bunch of stuff I don't connect with.
Do you think if, let's say, you weren't doing this full time and maybe your input of how much work you put into it was a little less, do you think it would have been as successful as it is? Because I'm not going to BS you, it is pretty successful. Would it have looked drastically different?
I think so because the main aspect of this show for me is the Patreon because if you can certainly just tune in to every Friday and there's been a show every single Friday since the show started for over 3 years now, 3.25 years. Every Friday you could depend on there being a release. And with the establishing of Patreon, which happened about 2.5 years ago, um, it started being 4 shows a week. And so to me, if I wasn't doing this full time, it would just probably have to stay at one show a week.
Sure,
Even that is, it's, even that would probably go down to maybe twice a month because
sure.
if I had a full-time job plus the show, once a week is a big ask. But, you know, this is kind of designed truly like the real nuts and bolts of really following this show. And there are people who are following the show, like they don't even want to listen to the brand new episodes until they've caught up with them. So they've
Sure,
got back to the beginning and are attempting to do that, including Patreon shows, of which there's over 300, and there's over 200 regular episodes. I think around 200. So um, it's always intended to be. It's a the Music Obsessives podcast, but
sure.
it's for the music fan that loves a deep dive. And so now I'm doing a Beach Boys deep dive, but even though they're my favorite band, they're one of many, many bands that
Sure.
I have done and will do a deep dive on.
And I very much enjoy that process because I think there are a lot of people out there who have the chance to find these guests and interview them, sort of do a malaise of the general overlook of the group rather than actually asking introspective questions, which is what I want to ask you about. The difference between you being a fan and wanting to know stuff versus you asking questions as an interviewer.
Wait, by the way,
What,
I have to correct you. It's you were looking for the word mélange. Malaise means like an ennui or a dull torpor.
that's why we have you on here to help me when I'm screwing up. For you and the way you do it and what you just explained of why you need to be doing it in the way you are. What is the difference? I shouldn't say difference, the dividing factor between you being a big fan of the guest and wanting to know specific things versus you, the interviewer and journalist, asking questions that will create a entertaining experience for people tuning in?
I attempt as best I can to establish some kind of relationship previous to the mics going on, if there's a possibility in that happening, because the only thing that's of any use to me whatsoever on my show is the truth. Now, to me, the truth could be just truly how I feel about something, which is not truth, but it's my opinion, but it's my true opinion. And also with, an interview, I'm looking for a conversation. I'm not
Sure,
looking for a Q&A. That's just the way that I like to do it. So I get a lot of comments online that this guy will never shut up. Reason is because during a conversation, there's two people speaking.
sure,
I don't think I'm any more interesting than my guests. But what's of great value to me is that when I have somebody on, they're not carrying the weight. I don't just lob a question at them and sit back and then think of a disconnected follow-up question where I'm not connected to what they're even saying. To me, I'm keyed in and I'm trying to bring this conversation into places that they've not had before. I
sure.
really, am attempting with each show to go to places that they have not been. So what I'm hoping is that on my show, if you're doing the rounds of press, that on the stop at on Discograffiti, you're going to be talking about stuff that hopefully you're not talking about with anyone else. Those talking points, quote
Sure.
unquote, which are so to me deadly boring. I didn't quit my job and chuck my career away in order to just talk about the same old shit that somebody's gonna be speaking about on their episode, on the
Sure.
show, the episode for their show, and then the next one and the next one. It's boring to me.
Well, that's why I like your model, and that's why I try to have some sort of entertaining dialogue because there are tons of things out there. I mean, the majority of documentaries or books on the band, they all seem to end at 1980 or at least Kokomo, and then that's it. There's no wide range from it, and it's frustrating because there was the potential with the Disney one to really share the story because they did stuff past Kokomo, a positive look or not, and it's frustrating. So to get a
It didn't
full,
go in the Disney doc. They didn't go past 1976. Forget about it.
true,
It's like the Beach Boys stopped
yeah,
50 years ago. 50 years.
yeah,
I mean, where they left off was around the time when they decided to mainly focus what used to be creative energy on
yeah,
being more of a nostalgic act. So I can see why they left off there. But as a band, they certainly did not end in 1976.
Well, you look at it, and I don't want to go into this group because wasn't the type of avenue I want to go down. But you look at a group like Black Sabbath. I mean, they I'm sure had very dark elements, and we all know what happened with Ozzy and how he got kicked out and what turned with that career. But there's no real looking boldness within the Beach Boys of wanting to show everything with their story as an interviewer, as a fellow interview, I think we both have this idea that we're going to have a conversation with somebody involved in the group in various different ways, and it's going to be successful and it's going to be a great positive experience. But as we both know, that's not always the case. And the prime example I'm talking about is your interview, the first public Beach Boys interview you have on Patreon and YouTube is the David Marks interview, which you say in the description on YouTube and the audio platforms and Patreon that there was no real practice beforehand, no real prep for the work, just a phone call, and you can tell it goes off the rails from the beginning on his end. What was your expectation for it beyond putting a lot of prep in with talking to somebody and then trying to uh, call an audible during that raucous event with him?
Well, I don't consider that a fail. To me, that was actually one of the best interviews I've ever done because of how honest the whole thing was.
Yeah,
To me, the point of that phone call was to get an interview, not
sure.
to have an interview,
Yeah,
but to schedule one. That was the idea behind the call. I had no notes ready. I had not done any research. So anything that I'm saying is based on what I already knew about the band. It wasn't even done on Zoom. He didn't know how to do Zoom. And so I had a fucking microphone pointed to the speakerphone of my cell. The whole thing was just flying by the seat of my pants and hanging on for dear life. So it's one of the reasons why it came out so great, I think. In my estimation,
sure.
my criteria for a great episode, like I said before, is something where the truth is leaking out, whether
Sure.
intended or not intended. And to me, whether or not David intended to, he went for it. And I don't know how he feels about the interview or if he's heard it. I honestly don't know if he remembers doing it. I
Yeah.
have no clue. But I do know that I am incredibly proud of somebody who's in a very well known band doing an interview that is so incredibly, you know, um, opposed to the idea of what a PR approved interview should be,
Sure.
and especially when you take into account all the whitewashed examples of Beach Boy history being thrown
Sure.
out there, as if, the Beach Boys fans are, like disgusting pieces of shit. When I see the Disney documentary, the vibe I have is that I'm not worth something that's real, that tells
Yeah.
the truth about my favorite band, that, I'm not worth it. And I get the feeling that Disney feels that way, and that maybe, I don't know if how involved he was in this, but if he was involved, then maybe that Mike Love feels that way. I have no clue.
Yeah.
Whoever was guiding the rudder on that one had a contemptuous, I think, feeling toward the Beach Boys crowd. And I feel like I can say that because I'm not trying to stick a flag in the ground in the Beach Boys universe
Sure.
and stay here for the rest of my life. I'm going to cover the Beach Boys. It's going to take a long time, but when I'm done, that's it. I'm moving on. I'm not a David Leaf. I'm not a Dominic Priori. So I'm going to say what I feel and then move on. Um,
Well,
so
I think with that, and I have on good authority to believe it, that the Disney stuff, the predominant talking points in that documentary were Mike, I think Al, and to a degree Bruce Barely. Obviously, Brian with his health situation, he's not going to be in public doing a lot of that stuff. So, and I think Mike definitely has an avenue of his version of wanting to tell the group story with David's conversation with you, you're a big fan. We know that, and you love Smile and Pet Sounds and all these albums. David was on a good chunk of their stuff, probably the first fourth, depending on how much you want to consider a fourth and a fifth. and he only says Pet Sounds, and surprisingly enough, that's why God made the radio with you is their good stuff. As a fan of their discography, how heartbreaking in the moment was hearing him say that a majority of their stuff was shit.
Not at all heartbreaking. You know, well, I mean, I first of all, I don't know how much of that is coming from a resentment against his life in and out of the Beach Boys, and how much of that is honest truth. When you look at the kind of work that he typically gravitates toward, it's not really Beach Boys music. It's
Sure.
not music. So maybe it's just not his kind of thing. But so I can't really say one way or the other, but there's a difference between hearing David Marks say that Beach Boys music is poop and hearing Bruce Johnston say it.
Sure.
You know, Bruce said that to me. You know, I haven't done an interview with him, but he was extremely dismissive towards most of the Beach Boys catalog when I met with him in person. And to me, that was a letdown because he not only was dismissive of it for himself, but he was dismissive of the fans liking it as much as they do. And so that was disappointing.
Well, I have to give you credit also because at some point, because I know at the beginning you sort of told him or reassured him that what you were doing was going to be of quality and of a different avenue than the basic conglomerate of typical Beach Boy interviews. Later on throughout the conversation, I could tell that David seemed to be more open and warm with you during the conversation. Did you recognize that at a certain point? And then what does that say then about your skills in the moment as an interviewer?
Well, yes, I definitely recognized it as it was happening. When I'm in the process of doing an interview, I have done a tremendous amount of research, and as soon as I'm pressed record, I have let go. So I may abandon my notes completely. Like with Carney, that's basically what I wound up doing, is I realized I had these train tracks, and it was not applicable for what I was doing at that time. So and I tell her, I can't remember what part of the series it's in, but I tell her, you know, I just want you to know that I am officially abandoning my notes for for what we're doing here. But I can always tell where things are going, and it's kind of like when an actor is playing a part on stage. Oftentimes, when they come off, they don't remember the performance. Usually I don't remember what I've spoken about
Sure.
with with an artist until I listen back afterwards in editing. I have no recollection. It's only during editing because I'm 100% in the moment. And I'm in the moment because I'm ascertaining how we're dancing. You know, is are they leaning towards me? Am I leaning towards them? Are they happy? Are they aware of the time? Are they, you know, looking at their watch? Are they looking me in the eyes? I'm taking all of it in because all of it is going to attempt to direct where I'm taking things next, what kind of question I'm going to ask next. It's going to dovetail into everything that I do. So, and as far as what it says for my interviewing skills, that's a question for the listener. You know, I'm only doing the kind of show that I'm happy with, that I want to hear. So, you know, everything that I've posted, I feel good about. Some more than others, but you know, ultimately, it's up to just like I'm rating you know, an endless amount of musicians' work, and who the hell gives me the right to do that? I'm also not at liberty to judge myself,
Sure.
except to to create things that are things I would like to hear. And I never listen back to my shows except to edit. So it's not like I'm a fan of my work. I just know the
Yeah.
style under which I want to operate, and those are the kinds of shows I want to make. That's it.
Like yourself, I'm sure there are guests you'd love to have on that I'd love to have on that either you can get, just it doesn't work out, or you want to have them on, but you can't figure out how to get a hold of them, or just you're not gonna be able to get a hold of them. And one of the guests that you were going to have on your program ended up not coming to fruition, ended up not having him. David talks a lot about in your conversation and sort of shreds him a bit with personal stuff or business stuff being Mike Love. In a moment like that, I know you're not worried about getting sued. You said that to David in the conversation. But in a moment like that where you were going to have him on, he backs out last minute and you end up not doing it, and then David goes on the attack towards him. How do you handle a situation like that then?
Well, at that time, he had not, to clarify one thing, he has not officially backed out.
Okay,
He just, it was something that he said yes to, and then he kind of let it die on the vine and didn't pursue it back. But his yes was what inspired me to start getting uh, other commitments. So before Mike, there was nobody signed up to this. After Mike, I was able to get 40, at the current count, it's 46 commitments. So honestly, at this point, whether or not Mike's involved, that's up to him.
sure,
It would be nice, but it's certainly not. This series or the show is not going to live or die on Mike Love. I
sure.
like I like Mike, and the Beach Boys are my favorite band, but the person that I'd most like to have on the show from the Beach Boys is certainly not Mike Love. It is not Mike Love. I'll give you one fucking guess who it would be, but it's definitely not Mike Love. The two members of the Beach Boys that I would least like to have on the show are the two current Beach Boys that are touring.
Huh. Interesting. Well, unfortunately, the one of them that is no longer touring that I'm sure you'd like to have on can't interview, which is a sad thing because his interviews are so iconically known as all over the place and maybe not so necessarily truthful from a listener viewer perspective, which is unfortunate as well.
I'd
Mentioning,
love to somehow think that he is capable because I
yeah,
know he talks, and
yeah.
so I know some version of maybe not an interview but a conversation
Oh, sure, yeah.
had. And I'd love to think that, like I said, I'm an optimist, and I think that it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that Brian, would somehow be able to do the show. But I would love to have McCartney do Pet Sounds. I would love for him to come on and do Pet Sounds.
Well, when that happens, because it's not going to happen, it's not going to possibly happen. It will happen. I'll be there to tune in. You mentioned Carney Wilson, which is one of the other public actual conversations interviews you have with somebody, and she is another person who is completely honest. Obviously, there's very heavy stuff that you're not going to discuss about her father's life with Landy and so forth, but very honest with what she was saying,
We
not, having a, sorry?
talk about Landy in part one.
Well, there was some, I think there were some parts of post landing that she didn't discuss because I know there were a few times where she said we won't discuss this um, right now. But for someone like that, compared to David, who was in the group, Carney's a child and product of this group and lived through a lot of this stuff, positive or negative. How much of that then, that avenue of talking to a member of that world changed in order to prepare for this conversation, if any?
What do you mean? How did it change?
So, I mean, she lives through some of the stuff. So obviously you're going to ask her questions that you want to know, but also you don't want to be too personal where you're going to make her feel bad and want to be turned off by the conversation and leave prematurely.
Well, first of all, I started the whole thing on purpose by flipping a very personal card about myself, so that I could, so I could set the standard for the conversation. That I wasn't just asking her to be honest; I was asking the same of myself, and that's the criteria that I try to set for myself for all shows. Is I want to be honest about who I am, so that somebody else, well, number one, because it just for me feels better to be open. It feels like a relief to not keep secrets. I don't have to shout them from the rooftops at all times, but it's also nice to not have to feel guarded, and to be able to use that as a way as a springboard for my guests' honesty is just a win-win. So, I don't necessarily shy away from going in certain places, but I might be asked by Carney afterwards, can you please leave out such and such?
Sure.
Which I did. She asked me to leave only, we talked for 5 hours. It's the longest interview that she's ever had in her life. And she asked me to leave one thing out. That's it. But otherwise, she had no requests during editing.
Well, one of the things that I thought was funny, speaking of some of the more familial and house stuff, was how she shared the story. I mean, you kind of asked the question, but she sort of phrased it and brought about her own way, was her and her friends being over at home after school, watching TV, Howdy Doody, whatever it was, and he's playing the same beat of Shortened Bread or Ding Dang on repeat on the piano. And they're telling him to knock it off, and he walks around, thinks whatever, and comes back and does it again and again and again. And
Yeah,
I think that's the intent of a conversation without prodding too much, because there's stuff to tell, but how do you tell it in a way that someone's going to be open enough to present themselves with a stranger? Because you've met her and you obviously after 5 hours you probably know a certain amount about her, but beyond that, no, we don't know. I don't know you really that well. You don't know me. You don't know her, and she doesn't know you. So to be able to get that amount of stuff and that quality amount of stuff out is an important thing for people, because it gives them a better idea of what that story is beyond any sort of documentary that's made for profit. With your product and your intent with the product, it gives a picture to someone like myself who's interviewed people within the Beach Boys world, an idea of their proper story being told, whether you're in the inner sanctum or on the other side of the highly structured walls, such as a David Beard or a David Leaf, who knows the inside stuff more than us.
right.
For you, once you complete the Beach Boys arc in Discograffiti, how happy will you be knowing that you told a pretty accurate and in-depth story of them, whether you want to be considered inside the Beach Boys motif or not?
I mean, I, I I don't know what is considered in being a Beach Boys insider, but I know that there's unquestionably an empty space on the shelf for what it is that I'm doing. I already know that the interview with David Marks is the least guarded interview with a member of the Beach Boys at all, ever in the history of the group. There's no question. There's no other interview, even with Dennis when he was alive, that touches that. So I think it was a win right out of the gate for me, and that wasn't because of me, but it just circumstances being as they were, and I the way that I've decided to break it down is to do it by seasons. Some seasons will be longer than the others. This one is a relatively lengthy season. I mean, it'll be a straight shot going through to the end of 64, and that's Catch a Wave. That's
Sure.
season. Then Icarus Ascending will be only the year 1965. So today, Summer Days and Summer Nights, and Party. And then season 3 is only going to be Pet Sounds and Smile, and it's going to be many episodes on each. But then I'm going to be, then there's going to be like a shitload of records,
Sure.
probably like a straight shot from Smiley Smile to Sunflower
All right.
next season. Um, and then in between, there will be what I normally do, which is not one album per episode. I mean, I'm doing that only for the Beach Boys, but I have a lot of stuff on the burner right now. I'm going to do an interview soon with Peter Lewis of Moby Grape, and I'm going to, do an entire discographical trawl with him. And Dean Wareham from Galaxy 500 and Luna. He's going to be doing Galaxy 500 with me. Stuart Braithwaite from Mogwai is going to be doing Joy Division. Um, Big Lurch, the rapper who's in jail for murder. Uh, I did an interview with him. That's finished already. Um, who else? Panda Bear from Animal Collective is doing Animal Collective. So there's a ton that's already that will be used in between seasons to keep things going. Um, I always have, like at least a couple months of, completed shows in the wings.
Before we end today, I want to do a segment that I've sort of brought back. I changed it briefly with other people, but since we were so Beach Boys centric, I wanted to do this, and I like to call it all this or that. And I'll throw out a few topics, and you have to choose either this or that within them, and just briefly either choosing, not necessarily going super in depth with it. But if you're ready, we can get going. So the first one is sort of more 80s centric within the Beach Boys, and that's either choosing the Beach Boys 85 self-titled album or keeping the summer alive.
Um, oh man, that's like choosing to either have someone fart in your face or get punched in the nuts. It's really um, I would say probably keeping the summer alive just by a hair.
Okay. The next one, Brian Wilson presents Smile versus the Beach Boys Smile Sessions.
That's easy. Smile sessions.
Okay. The third one, two people who I consider, and they were full members at the time during their creative high peak in the early 70s, and one of which has played with Brian, one quickly on one-off appearance played with them, being Blondie Chaplin or Ricky Furtar.
Uh, Probably Ricky.
Okay. The next one, this is more of a behind the soundboard one where those who had their stamp on a lot of high success albums within the Beach Boys world as producers or engineers or whatever you want to consider them, Steve Desper or Chuck Britz.
Oh man, that's a tough one. I mean, I guess Chuck, but uh, that's a really tough one.
And the last one, and obviously not the least one, but the last one, in terms of songwriting. Uh, One of the brothers of Brian ended up being very creative, not probably the most creative of all groups with his very personal lyrics, especially with his finally released solo album in a deluxe form, being Dennis Wilson, the songwriter, versus Brian Wilson, the songwriter.
Oh, I'm to choose one of them.
Yeah, which one do you like more? Dennis Wilson when he was writing songs or Brian as a songwriter?
Brian, that would be interesting if anyone chose Dennis.
Well, I think you look at it and although Brian's had a very successful solo career, once he officially was away from Landy and on his own with whoever that may be behind him, supporting him, and some of the albums obviously are not as successful as other ones.
Yeah.
But you look at Dennis's only solo album that released, and when it was packaged as a deluxe one of Bamboo and Pacific Ocean Blue, it was roaring up the charts and it was immensely successful, and rightly so because that's where I like to think the Beach Boys music should have veered towards rather than talking about the MIU stuff. But
Well,
that's
look, the secret of consistency is just put out as little product as is humanly possible
yeah,
because then you don't go wrong. I mean, if you have one masterpiece and then you flounder for the rest of your life and don't do anything, not that Bamboo isn't anything, but it was not released, and
sure,
Poops wasn't released. It wasn't even, he basically had one album. It's
yeah.
hard to fall from your perch if you only make one album.
I want to say to you, sir, for the last a little over an hour, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, to talk to someone who's not just a professional immensely, but someone who's also been very successful in their own right and deserved right with their own product. It's a great treat to talk to someone of your stature, so thank you.
Hey, I really appreciate it, Nolan. And by the way, I really want to thank you personally for your support. I saw that you signed up for
Yeah,
Patreon, and I can't wait to hear what you think about what has not only already come down the pike, but what's coming up. Especially like this month, I know all the shows that are hitting this month, and it's insane what is. I mean, like for example, the week that the Little Deuce Coupe episode comes out, the version that the Patreons are going to be getting is not just 25 minutes longer, but I'm sorry, not even two, but three entire episodes in addition to that you're going to be getting. And it's just like, the ability, I think we live in an insane world. I've always I've always preferred the deep dive as a method of
Sure.
cultural expungement. I like to, soak up everything by an artist. I like to watch, you know, every episode of, like a short run documentary series in one sitting. I like to do it all at once. So, the Patreon really is built for me and people like me who just can't get enough. So
Sure.
this like is going to mirror that. And please keep in touch and tell me what you think
Yeah.
about some of the stuff you're going to hear.
Well, with what's been released already on YouTube within this genre of music storytelling, it's already entertaining. And why wait till it comes out when you can get it earlier on this platform with a few bucks extra? We mentioned the word YouTube and Patreon a lot throughout this conversation near the end as well. In terms of episodes, in terms of content of your product, where can they find it either in the moment currently or down the road as well?
Well, if you just want to get the free episodes, it's wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that's YouTube or whether it's Spotify, Apple, wherever it is that you listen. But I really recommend at least joining Patreon as a free member. It doesn't cost anything, and you'll always get an email letting you know when the next episode is coming out because every single episode in my Beach Boys series is coming out chronologically. So if you're not a Patreon member, and there, for example, today there was an interview that Dennis Dyken did of David Marks from 2013. That's only Patreon members are getting that. Um, and there's going to be a lot of shows like that, and you can buy them piecemeal, and they're the cheapest possible rate that Patreon will allow me to charge. That's how much I charge for the show by show if you want to get them piecemeal like that, or the other way that people are finding works for them is getting them season by season. So for $60, you can get season one of the Beach Boys without signing up for Patreon. And as they come out, you just go to the season one collections heading and you can listen to them as they go.
Okay.
So patreon.com/discograffiti. That's DISCOGRAFFITI. That's where you want to go, and you just sign up, and you'll find out when every single episode's coming out.
In terms of information of when you release it or what you say the episode's about, social media, where can they find the podcast or you or I guess just the podcast in general online?
If you're on Facebook, definitely join up the Facebook group for the podcast, which is Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. And the reason why why I'm so proud of that is that's about 2,000 members, and it's a very engaged group. There's a lot of posting, a lot of responses, and people have found each other and collaborate on their musicians. There's a lot of people who are, very well known in there who love it. And so that's, on Facebook, then Discograffiti Pod on Instagram and Discograffiti on X. Those are basically the three. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads as well, but I kind of only have a toe in those waters.
Well, everyone out there, do what the man says. You're going to want to because what he's contributing to the world is certainly of high extreme value in retrospect and looking back. As always, if you've enjoyed episodes like this one, do us a favor by subscribing on YouTube, following on the audio platforms, clicking at thumbs up and like buttons. You can tell us you enjoy these episodes. Turn on post notifications so you can stay up to date on those platforms when new episodes release, as well as clicking at share so you can continue to grow the podcast as well. Not to mention, if you want news and other sort of upgrades or updates to an extent on the show, do us a favor by following us on Instagram at Nolan Carr at night. And in the words of Johnny Carson, the dean of talk shows, certainly like this one, I bid you all a heartfelt good night. Till next time, take care.